In this video, I'll be taking you on a landscape photography adventure up Beinn Bhan on the Applecross Peninsula in the Northwest Highlands of Scotland on what was one of the very best landscape photography days I've ever had in my 10 years photographing Scotland. It really was superb, but it started off overcast. We didn't get our sunrise that we'd hoped for, and instead we walked through snow showers for quite some time. Eventually we spotted a massive boulder not too far from where we planned our sunrise shoot so we could get some shelter, and soon enough the snow did lift.
Well, it's another shower, and yeah, it's pretty bleak in the wind and the snow here, absolutely clagged in, so we are stopping off for a cup of tea and hiding behind this boulder. The morning's getting on, but hopefully the light will come through at some point. Okay, we can see something again, and as you can see we're getting closer to the mountain. It is pretty extensive. Lots of ridges coming out from the main ridge. And I think we want to head for that little cascade. I don't know if you can make it out. There might be a shot to be had there. Well, this looks extremely promising. What an amazing scene to find as we were cutting across slope and off path to get to this lochan at the base of the mountain. We could hardly hope for a better rapid than this, because you've got a clear view of the peak behind, but several cascades all in a row, all pointing in the same direction. So it's a pretty straightforward shot in many ways, but I am just going to talk you through how the scene changes as we walk around. And I have actually already taken an image that I like, because there was no snow when we got here and I knew we had to work fast to make the most of that opportunity. But now that I've got a bit of time, I can talk a little bit about the composition. So this is the scene as we found it as we arrived, and I think it's natural for landscape photographers to want to get closer to the obvious interest here, these cascades, but compositionally I think it's important to consider that the snow on the right hand side, these snowy banks, help to balance the composition. So I'm going to show you what happens when we do get closer to those rapids, and I'm going to have to be very careful as I walk down here because it is a little bit icy and slimy too. Yeah, so here we can fill the frame more with these rapids, but you start to get the sense that the scene might be slightly unbalanced by the black rock on the right, so you don't have cascades filling in that bottom right corner. And actually I did take a shot a little bit further back, because you can then introduce this tiny cascade, particularly with a 3:2 ratio frame, that does help balance it a little bit. So I've taken both the initial scene and a version something like this in some nice light, and I'll be able to decide which I prefer when I get home.
So here's that initial scene, and this has a really illustrative feel to it. It really illustrates the location pretty well, I think, but perhaps it's a little bit dull artistically. I think I'm possibly just a tiny bit too far from those rapids, and so it all feels a little bit flat, which is why I think this closer version is the stronger of the two that I was showing you in that video clip there. It does simplify things a bit, and actually that rapid does do a good job of filling in the bottom right corner, but it's this final image zoomed in on the main thrust of that water, the really simple but ultra wide view, that I think I will prefer in this particular case. It just feels a bit more dynamic. There's stronger lines and a stronger sense of motion coming from that diagonal rapid there. The cloud then started to break up, and actually some half light came through, not quite full sunshine. And originally I was really excited what this lighting could bring, but actually on looking at the images back at home, I think those more subdued images feel more authentic, and they fit together better because you don't have the contrast in the sky in particular, but also on the landscape. So I think it's those overcast images that I prefer.
We've been at these cascades for about half an hour now, and you can see the clouds moving over the peak there. We've had a bit of blue sky, but no direct sun yet. That's potentially coming from the left-hand side of the frame there. So one of the reasons we chose this location was we would get really nice side light if we did get any early light. So we'll hang around a bit longer. We have had a little recce a bit further up, and there's actually another scene that's worth photographing, so it might be that we move on in a second. There's another obvious cascade to go and check out. It looks like we can stand just beneath it. Obviously from here we're a little bit too far away to make the most of it, but I think up close it's going to make another interesting photograph. Time for another quick compositional tour. We've got that main flow of water on the right hand side and obviously the dominant peak a bit to the left of it. So whilst you can stay back here and perhaps zoom in, that creates a bit of imbalance, and I'm more inclined to come to the right to line those two up so we can keep our same distance and try and do that, but actually the river drops down to my right here, so I can't get any further right than that. Whereas if I zoom out and come forward, then I can drop down to the stream on the right hand side there, and then I can line up the two. This is obviously getting very loud now. Just need to make sure I don't fall in. So this is as wide as I can go. This is 16mm here, but obviously the 2x3 shot is a bit wider, so it does include the water at the base there and that rock. And I think this is probably around where my favoured composition is, even including some of the snow on the left there. But certainly you could do a number of things here.
I was really happy with this image at the time. It does feel well balanced and quite dynamic to me, even though it's perhaps using that rather obvious ultra wide effect of making a foreground subject dominant. But it just isn't different enough to the images that I'd just taken, because you have the same ridge in the background, and I really needed a strong alternative, something that looked completely different. Unfortunately, that opportunity came along just 10 minutes later.
This stream keeps producing more waterfalls, and as we move higher up the mountain we're seeing new parts of new peaks. And the sun's out at the moment, but as you can see the snow's coming in again. But I think this area here does work very well. Perhaps from this exact location it's a bit busy on the left hand side, and perhaps I need to get a little bit further up, eliminate that foreground cascade and slightly simplify the shot, because I'm really interested in photographing these peaks that are behind me if they aren't lost to the snow, which they are at the moment. Instead of talking to camera, I think I should have just come up here and taken a photo, because I'm pretty sure those two peaks are directly behind this scene here. And I do quite like the way that cascade flows down there, and those little snow-covered rocks, but yeah, maybe we'll have to wait this shower out. It looks pretty set in though. As the snow has ended, it's produced this fantastic depth effect, and now we can see the full ridge, so really pleased with this scene. I'm going to shoot it pretty much as you see here. Yeah, very different to the other images I think as well, so great to have an alternative that's not just a variation on exactly the same scene that I was photographing earlier.
So I am shooting for a book project here, which I'll hopefully be able to release in a few years' time, but I wanted to find some variety because those previous 5 images were really too similar. So I could use one of them in a project or in a book, but not 2. And this, whilst having the same concept of mountains above a cascade, feels really quite different. It's more ethereal, it's lighter, it's more colour neutral. And so this, with one of those previous images, would work quite well in a project, although perhaps they're still too similar to put opposite one another on a spread inside a book.
Well, we found our lochan, and what a superb location this is. I have to say it's infinitely more impressive in winter than in summer, though it's an amazing location even then, but wow, very, very beautiful. The problem with the lochan is that it's just an empty body of water without anything to really break it up. So as much as it could be beautiful in the right circumstances, perhaps with reflections or ice, at the moment it would be quite a plain foreground. Whereas these little pools that are frozen over with the little tufts of grass sticking out produce some lovely details. And I think I'll just take a photo of this one and then we'll have a wander around and see what else there is. We're just a short distance from the main lochans, which is off to my left here, and there's this much smaller, shallower lochans, which has then got colder overnight and snow has settled on top and a bit of ice has started to form, which creates these lovely shapes. This may well be the best spot to shoot it from, just here. Actually, I have just had a little wander, but it's a fun thing to explore. I mean, the great thing about snow and ice, of course, is it just creates this absolute wealth of opportunities and you can hardly go wrong, but I will have a bit of a wander and see if I can find something really perfect.
This pool, although obviously beautiful, was a tricky photographic subject, and that's often the problem with these incredibly beautiful scenes, is that you can occasionally struggle to do them justice, and then that is frustrating. This portrait image was probably the best I managed, just trying to make something of this shape in the ice, at least initially, but I soon moved on and tried other things.
I think I might try shooting a little panorama here. I'm not entirely convinced because this peak on the left-hand side of the panorama might be a bit too prominent, a bit too strong a focal point that isn't quite counterbalanced perhaps by the peak on the right, but I'm certainly going to take the image and see how it works out.
I really love this photo for its obvious cold, wintry feel. And I think objectively it's not entirely balanced, it's a little bit left heavy, but actually I'm going to look past that because what makes this mountain unusual is it has this vast main ridge but then subsidiary ridges escaping it, and the snow that's falling down and giving the photo some depth is also separating those subsidiary ridges from that main ridge, and so you can see that prominent peak on the right still. It's not just lost to a larger wall. So I really love this photo.
What an amazing morning shoot it's been, but we had planned to go up the mountain there, which we've hardly seen. It's been in cloud almost the entire time, so tendency is to just stay down here and play around with the various options that the water brings and maybe these erratics that are around us here. But I have just checked the cloud radar and it looks like this afternoon is going to be less cloudy than it was this morning, so I think we're just going to have to go for it, and I'm not sure that I'm quite physically up to it, but I'm sure we will get up there. The route we're taking is just off to my left there, but it is a massive slog. I remember it from the summer, so well, we'll just have to get started and see how we go.
Of course, that was the moment that the scene opened out completely, and so we dashed back to our frozen lochans to see if we could do something slightly different. And this time I tried to incorporate these boulders that you see in the foreground to add in some depth that we'd effectively lost when that cloud that was pouring over the ridge disappeared. And I think I do quite like this image, particularly as an alternative to that earlier photo, but it just doesn't have that atmosphere. And the left-hand side is always going to look excessively bright and washed out because that's where the sun was starting to come through. But still glad that I came back to take this one.
Here is the much simpler version, and now that it's so bright, I can actually shoot handheld and use my tripod to get a more elevated position, which is what I'm doing here. I'm raising the camera up, then I get more diagonal, a more diagonal impression of this snow shape in the foreground. And the camera's about 2 feet above my head here, but it is possible, it works on the tripod, so new shooting technique unlocked.
I think this is a much better response to the conditions than that panorama, and actually I'm surprised I didn't think of this earlier on because that reflection at the back of the lochans is really quite nice, the way it picks up the mountain there, and the shape of the snow is obviously a lot stronger, but of course it was rather unusual having this idea to put the tripod right above my head. I mean, the tripod wasn't on the ground at all, I was just holding it up in the air, but it does allow me to make much more of this little lochan. And just looking at it now, maybe that left hand side is a little bit washed out and static, so the lines are all a bit horizontal. Maybe a little crop from the left there would be a good thing, but yeah, it's a good alternative to what I'd already shot. But in figuring all of this out, we'd used up yet more time, and we really did need to get cracking if we were going to get up the mountain.
We are just getting to the base of the final climb to gain the main ridge. As you can see, it's absolutely gorgeous weather at the moment, and we're well sheltered in this corrie from the wind, so I'm just hiking in my base layer. But before we do that last push, I think I need something to eat, so we're going to stop for some lunch. Ham, cheese and coleslaw sandwich, classic mountain food. Up and up we go. I'm sure it doesn't look like much on the video, but this is going to take us a while. Joe reckons an hour, I think a little less than that, but it's going to be a bit of a slog. I'm not going to record any of it though, I don't think. I'll just get up there now. We've absolutely destroyed that ascent because we're almost at the top and we're only 20 minutes in, so that's good. Still some life in these legs yet. But I thought I would show you these two enormous bits of Torridonian sandstone here. Make a really fantastic subject in the right lighting, maybe with some more snow and some softer light, looking towards the Cowlin Hills there. Really quite epic. No need for crampons and ice axes today, even though we've got them with us. This is soft powder snow. So we've made it to the top of the ridge. We actually got up here in half an hour, so it was pretty quick in the end. And from here we actually have a massive view looking towards the Cowlin Hills and down this corrie that we've just walked up. But as you can see, it's full of shadow, so there's no real photography to be had here, I don't think. So we're going to continue along the ridge and see what we can find, perhaps shooting in the opposite direction to the one you're looking in now.
I mean, as much as it's a cliche, the photography is kind of just a bonus on a day like today, isn't it?
There's a little bit of cloud coming in now, which is actually kind of what we want. We don't want empty blue skies. Having a bit of broken cloud to bring broken light is probably a good thing, but obviously you have to pick your moments a little more. But you can see here we're looking down over a couple of these ridges that escape the main ridge, and the aim really is to continue along this ridge to the right as you see it here, so that we can look back on those pinnacles. And the double win there is that it gets us closer to the car, so that's the plan. The view behind me is absolutely ridiculous. I need to be a bit careful with this cornice here because you can't get too close to the edge. But you can actually see some lochans down there, and all we need is a bit of light and atmosphere and this cloud to peel away. And I think we're going to have an absolutely amazing scene. Just look at that. Absolutely mind-blowing. What a mountain this is. I think I just need to keep it simple here and keep shooting as the cloud moves and the light changes.
Took about 10 minutes for this rather fantastic lighting scenario to emerge, with the sun catching some cloud that was just behind this ridge that is escaping the main ridge that we are stood on. So that really does highlight the main feature of that ridge, I think, and compositionally it helps to balance those dark lochans to the bottom left as well. It maybe would have been nice if there was something a bit more dynamic in the foreground, but I really didn't have much to work with there. And I don't think it's too much of a problem given the sort of visual strength of the rest of the image. And there's some nice variations in blues and greys coming from the landscape being lit differently in different areas of the shot. So I think this does work really well. I tried it in portrait. I always try to shoot different formats when I can, because you never know when a landscape or a portrait image might come in handy. This maybe feels a tiny bit tight, but I think it still works fairly well. We could have carried on photographing that location for some time, but we were still a very long way from where we started. We wanted to get a little bit closer to the car, but also we had a lot more of the mountain to explore, so we carried on hiking in some pretty magical conditions.
This is kid in a candy shop stuff, because look how amazing this foreground texture is, and with the view to match, I'll get much more epic than this. That cloud's coming and going, so I'm sure I'll get a shot here. And if I flip around the other way, then this scene isn't too bad either. More amazing snow. You can see we just walked up to the edge over there and took a shot. You probably do want to leave the lochans out in this case because they become a bit of a distraction, so you need to sort of step away from the edge and do this sort of thing. But what a place.
So here's that second scene, and I think what I like most about this image is the slight ambiguity that comes from that foreground. It's almost like a white drape of cloth torn across the bottom of the frame, so it has some sort of abstract quality to me, and certainly that's helped by the very simple composition looking back on the valley that we'd actually walked up earlier in the day. And then the view looking in the opposite direction with this really incredible foreground, in this case perfectly lit, sort of half lit with the sun partially obscured by cloud. That seemed to produce the best lighting. And it's got these lovely flowing shapes and diagonal lines. It's a really dynamic foreground, just the kind of thing I'd hope to find on a trip like this. And the ridge in the background, even though it's partially obscured by the cloud, is great too. But what really throws this image for me is that lochan towards the bottom left. And actually, although I could include even more to the left-hand side, there's just another lochan right there. So this really didn't work, unfortunately, because that lochan just isn't in the right place in the image. I did, of course, have to have a go at a panorama, and this is a 180-degree panorama, so it gives you a sense of the scale of the scene, although it also explains why we've got this rather unfortunate bananaing effect in the foreground, which does slightly put me off shooting in this way. But what I do like about this scene, aside from the obvious spectacular nature of the landscape itself, is the way that the cloud is allowing the light to almost glow where it's striking the peaks. There's this sort of filtration effect that lends the landscape a really magical impression. So a pretty impactful image, even if I'm not quite sure about that curved foreground.
Getting some light over there now.
I think I've just taken my favourite shot of the day so far, which Joe right here is copying. But the light now is a little harsher than it was. With the sun diffusing through the cloud, this foreground texture was a little softer. At the moment it's just a little bit too much. But hopefully you can see the portrait frame there, and I actually got a little bit lower, and I started off further to the right actually. So it was a little bit too diagonal, but coming down to the left here and getting lower. Hopefully you can see my frame there. I'm probably going to hang around and just see if the light does change, but if not, I think that shot's, well, as good as I can manage up here anyway.
I'll try not to go on too much here because I absolutely love this photo. The foreground is really what makes it. We've got these lovely curvaceous lines in the snow, and the texture is there. It feels really tactile and inviting. The light is pretty much perfect, and of course I did have the opportunity to effectively select exactly how much light I wanted to fall on the scene to sculpt those lines. But also the peak in the background is really quite prominent and separated from the hills beyond by that thin veil of cloud. So there's a bit of atmosphere there too. And I think the overall balance of the photo works really nicely as well. So if I'd only taken this one photo on this day, on a day when I took many photos that I really liked, I think I could have gone home very happy indeed.
Around to a new promontory here, but I think I'm going to have to shoot the hills of Torridon over there. Looking amazing, nice layering effect.
I was really happy with this image when I took it, but I have to say I'm not going to dwell on it here because we really were spoilt later on in the day when the light really came into its own.
Another amazing ridge. with some nice sastrugi just on the edge that Joe is setting up to photograph there. I just tried taking a photo and actually the sun was on the sastrugi just before I'd got set up, but by the time I took it, it had at least faded, so I might have a shot. But yeah, this is the day that just keeps on giving.
More amazing foregrounds here, which isn't unusual on mountains in Scotland in the snow. The wind does make these amazing shapes, but still I've never tired of photographing them. And a different ridge in the background, this time the one that we were actually going to head down on our descent back to the car at the end of the day. And a really nice alternative to some of the other images that I have just shown you. I think you can probably see here that a crop from the left, although this is already cropped to 4x5, a crop from the left might well make for an even stronger composition. Unfortunately, at this point, my mics ran out of battery, which I didn't realise until a little later, and then I switched to my backup. But you can see what incredible lighting we had to finish the day. And although that sunlight never hit us on Beinn Bhan, it did catch the hills of the mountains of Torridon, which you can see actually have less snow on them. And I think there's a nice contrast here between this cold, frozen world that we're stood on and those warmer, more inviting slopes in the distance. But this does also work well as a panorama, which I think would make a really good double page spread in a book to break up the rhythm a little bit of more detailed and complex compositions. But of course you can also take sections of that panorama as the light changes, and here there's this lovely colour contrast between the sunlit slope of Beinn Bhan here and the blue lit snow-capped peak of Leach in the back there. But maybe my favourite scene was this one looking towards Ben Alligin with this faint rainbow appearing, which soon progressed up into the cloud, which was really the icing on the cake on what was a really fabulous day, one for the record books for sure.
I cannot believe how good today has been. It has been incredible throughout the entire day. We've had such a range of conditions and unbelievable scenery. When Scotland's like this, there is no better place in the world, and I've got so many shots now that I think this vlog is going to run on for way too long. So I think I'll probably, if I do take any more images, just tack these onto the end of the video. But if you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. That's always appreciated. I do want to grow this channel and put out more videos like this, but I hope you've enjoyed it.